From the music world, R&B legend D'Angelo has passed.
Before you get into the business, you really don't know what it's about until you get into it. You know, once you rub heads with snakes and, you know, you get jaded.
D'Angelo knew the end was coming months before anyone else did, but what he did with that knowledge left everyone stunned. His deathbed confessions flipped the whole story of his mysterious disappearance upside down, exposing truths that changed everything we thought we knew about him. D'Angelo passed on October 14th, 2025, in his Manhattan apartment, but the man who took that last breath had been quietly preparing for this moment long before the 15 months since his pancreatic cancer diagnosis. Those closest to him would later piece it all together, realizing that his strange behavior during that final year wasn't random. It was filled with hidden messages, clues about the heavy truth he'd been carrying alone. These were truths that explained decades of chaos everyone once blamed on fame and addiction. That cancer diagnosis? It was just one part of a much bigger secret. D'Angelo had been hiding something deeper, something even his own family never saw coming. In his final weeks, he stayed in that same Manhattan apartment, surrounded by the instruments that built his legacy. The cancer had first shown up during what should have been a simple routine checkup. He'd been losing weight fast, always tired, brushing it off as just the pressure of recording and performing. When the truth hit, it hit hard. Pancreatic cancer doesn't wait around. But instead of going public or seeking pity, D'Angelo chose silence. He poured his last bits of strength into music and family, reaching out to old friends not to say goodbye, but to thank them. Those private calls, later shared by the people he contacted, revealed a man trying to mend every broken bridge before it was too late.
You know what I'm saying? This is like a folk album, man. The natural progression from soul, the next step to soul was funk. Early Sly, a lot of early James Brown, a lot of early Funkadelic, Parliament. You know what I'm saying? A lot of early progression when the music was just starting to change.
And while all this was happening, his son with Angie Stone, Michael D'Angelo Archer II, was carrying his own heartbreak, still grieving the loss of his mother after her tragic car accident earlier that year. At just 27, Sevo Twain, D'Angelo's son, became his father's rock during those heartbreaking final months. Taking on the role of caretaker, he watched firsthand as his dad chose silence over sympathy, keeping his illness a secret from the world. That choice wasn't random, it was pure D'Angelo. The same man who once disappeared from the spotlight now chose to face death the same way he faced fame, on his own terms. After the wild reaction to his untitled video, D'Angelo had learned how heavy fame could get. He hated how it invaded his peace, always preferring to let his music do the talking instead of his mouth. Even as he stared death in the face, he refused to blur that line between his public genius and his private pain. And when his closest circle finally spoke, they didn't reveal some overblown legacy statement. No, his final message was quiet but powerful, pure gratitude. Gratitude for the gift of creation. For every studio session, every collaboration, every fan who ever connected with his sound.
D'Angelo, whose real name is Michael Eugene Archer, passed away due to complications from pancreatic cancer, which now appears he was quietly battling.
The man who spent decades mastering emotional honesty through music faced death with that same raw truth. No filters, no fakery. Michael Eugene Archer came into this world on February 11th, 1974, in Richmond, Virginia. Born into a household where music and faith weren't hobbies, they were survival. His father, a Pentecostal preacher, filled their home with gospel hymns and fiery sermons, while his mother brought the groove, the soul, the rhythm, the R&B heartbeat that would live inside her son forever. That family home was more than just walls, it was young Michael's first music school. Sundays meant packed church pews, voices rising in call and response, bodies moving like the music had taken over their spirits. From that, he learned early music wasn't just sound, it was prayer, a language for feelings too deep to say out loud. Growing up in 1982nd, Richmond, a city balancing its Confederate past with a bold black future, Michael soaked up every sound around him: gospel, soul, funk, building the foundation of the genius the world would one day call D'Angelo. At just 10 years old, Michael's world flipped the moment he heard Prince's Purple Rain.
I basically didn't know how to handle or to accept everything that happened. So, and then to just seeing everything. Because before you get into the business, you really don't know what it's about until you get in.
That album wasn't just music, it was a revelation. It showed him that one artist could play every instrument, craft entire worlds of sound, and still make it all feel personal. From that moment, he had a map, a vision for the kind of artist he wanted to become. His mom saw the spark right away and signed him up for piano lessons. It didn't take long for everyone to notice the kid was different. He could hear complex harmonies and recreate them like it was second nature. But the real magic didn't happen in a classroom, it happened in the church basement. That's where Michael truly came alive, experimenting with the electric piano, layering sounds until simple tunes turned into deep, emotional conversations through music. As a teenager, Richmond's airwaves brought a new sound. Hip-hop, radio stations, and mixtapes passed around by friends opened his ears to a whole new world. He fell in love with how drum machines could sound robotic yet still hit you right in the heart. That mix of machine and soul became the foundation of his production style, raw, emotional, and precise all at once. He started blending what he'd learned in church live instruments, gospel chords, that spirit-filled rhythm with the slick, modern beats of R&B. By high school, he'd formed his first band, rocking small Richmond stages and local talent shows. The crowd couldn't look away. He had that rare kind of presence, powerful yet shy, commanding yet distant. Fans noticed how he'd close his eyes while performing, like he was disappearing into the music itself. But not everyone was on board. His father struggled with Michael's growing taste for what he called worldly music, creating a rift between faith and fame that would haunt him for years. That battle between the church and the charts, the sacred and the secular, became the heartbeat of his art. By senior year, he was already writing songs that fused gospel soul with R&B's groove, building the sound that would one day change music forever. Those early songs showed a young D'Angelo wrestling with some heavy truths: desire, faith, and identity, all tangled together in ways that made his church community both proud and uneasy. The music was undeniable, full of soul, power, and raw emotion, but it wasn't confined to the church's version of spirituality. It was human, messy, real, and that scared people. Choosing to chase music full-time meant leaving Richmond behind for New York City, and that move hit deep. It wasn't just a career leap, it was a spiritual test. He was stepping away from the faith-filled world that raised him to enter an industry built on fame, money, and temptation.
When you're doing something different, it was funny because when I first dropped Voodoo, a lot of people didn't like it initially because it was different than Brown Sugar.
The young man who stepped onto that bus carried all the lessons of gospel, soul, and rhythm. But he had no idea how much the music business was about to test his heart, his values, and his sound. New York in the early 90s was electric, a creative explosion of black artistry. Soul, jazz, hip-hop, everything was blending into something new, and Michael Archer arrived right in the middle of it. That's when he dropped the Michael and became D'Angelo, a name born from his middle name and inspired by the artist Michelangelo, hinting that his art would be deeper than radio hits or quick fame. He recorded his first demo in a dusty basement studio with equipment most professionals would have laughed at. But instead of holding him back, that raw setup gave his music a rough, intimate edge that made every note feel personal. When label execs heard it, they couldn't even explain what they were hearing. It just felt real. That's what they'd been searching for all along: authenticity. When D'Angelo started working on his debut album, Brown Sugar, perfection became his obsession. He played nearly every instrument himself, building songs layer by layer, until each one felt like a living, breathing world. It took almost 2 years, and in the process, he drove away producers and engineers who couldn't keep up with his vision. The title track, Brown Sugar, came from his fascination with how music and desire could hit the same emotional nerve, that deep connection between sound and soul that would define everything he ever made. Brown Sugar wasn't just about a woman, it was about the music itself. D'Angelo laced the lyrics with double meaning, blurring the line between love, lust, and pure artistic passion. The production was stripped down but hypnotic, a soft drum groove, a subtle bass line, and D'Angelo's voice floating through it all like smoke in the air. Simple on the surface, but deeper than most people realized. When Brown Sugar dropped in 1995, it hit like nothing else out there. D'Angelo wasn't just another R&B singer, he was the spark that lit a whole new movement. The album sold over 3 million copies worldwide, but its real power was how it changed the game. It opened doors for artists who wanted to bring soul back into modern sound, people like Lauryn Hill, Erykah Badu, and Maxwell, who all said Brown Sugar showed them how to blend the old school with the new. The fame hit fast and hard. Suddenly, D'Angelo was everywhere. TV shows, magazine covers, interviews. But the spotlight didn't fit him right. He'd light up on stage, then shut down the moment the cameras stopped rolling. In interviews, his answers were short but sharp, like he believed talking about his music somehow drained it of its magic. Still, his collaborations from that era are legendary. That duet with Lauryn Hill, Nothing Even Matters, was pure chemistry, two voices melting into one emotional wave that felt both personal and universal. And when he linked with The Roots on Illadelph Half-Life, he brought those church-born harmonies into hip-hop in a way that sounded sacred and street at the same time. But as his fame grew, so did the pressure. The media started obsessing over his looks, the light skin, the long hair, the sex symbol image that he never asked for. Reporters talked more about his appearance than his art, and it messed with him deeply. For someone who lived for the music, not the fame, that kind of attention was heavy, and it marked the beginning of a struggle he couldn't easily escape. D'Angelo started realizing that success as a black male artist came with a whole different kind of pressure expectations that had nothing to do with talent. After Brown Sugar blew up, the industry wanted a sequel, something bigger and shinier, but D'Angelo wasn't built for chasing trends. The follow-up sessions became intense, long, unpredictable nights in the studio where he'd tear apart entire songs just to rebuild them again the next day. Musicians who worked with him during that time said it was wild. He'd stay locked in for hours, searching for a sound he could feel but couldn't quite catch, like he was chasing something just out of reach. What was supposed to be a normal break between albums turned into a 5-year mystery, and the industry started whispering. That rising star everyone once celebrated was now being called an enigma. Label execs who used to praise his independence started losing patience. They wanted hits, fast ones. But D'Angelo refused to rush the art. He was learning that fame doesn't just reward creativity, it tries to control it. The same industry that once cheered for his originality was now pushing him to compromise it, and that's where the real battle began. Those 5 years weren't wasted, though. They were transformation. The endless studio sessions became the foundation for something legendary, Voodoo. When it finally dropped in 2000, it didn't sound like anything else on the radio. D'Angelo tossed out every rule of modern R&B and built something that felt ancient and futuristic all at once. He formed a dream team, Questlove on drums, Pino Palladino on bass, and Mike Campbell on guitar. Together, they became a neo-soul powerhouse. The recordings moved between New York and Virginia, but the vibe stayed the same, raw, live, spiritual. D'Angelo didn't want programmed beats or digital polish. He wanted real human rhythm. He and Questlove even intentionally left imperfections in the timing, tiny offbeats that made the music breathe, sway, and live. That's what made Voodoo timeless. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The rhythms on Voodoo didn't just move, they breathed. The beats would push forward, then fall back, creating a groove that felt like a heartbeat instead of a metronome. That loose, human swing, later known as drunk drumming, changed everything. It inspired a whole new wave of artists to ditch robotic perfection and chase something more alive, more real. Lyrically, Voodoo took D'Angelo into bold new territory, deeper, darker, more sensual, and more spiritual than Brown Sugar ever dared to go. Tracks like Devil's Pie dug into temptation, that tug of war between creativity and corruption, while Playa Playa explored what it really costs to chase love, power, and fame. The whole album treated desire like a double-edged sword, something divine but dangerous, echoing D'Angelo's own struggles with fame, faith, and control. Inside the studio, the energy got obsessive. Musicians said the sessions could stretch 12, sometimes 15 hours straight, D'Angelo chasing perfection like a man possessed. He'd layer vocals over and over until every whisper, every sigh hit just right. And if a track didn't match the emotion in his head, gone. Months of work erased in seconds. He was searching for something pure, that raw truth you can feel, not just hear. Then came Untitled, How Does It Feel?, the video that flipped his whole world upside down. What was meant to be an intimate visual of vulnerability turned him overnight into a full-blown sex symbol. The camera lingered, the internet lost its mind, and suddenly, D'Angelo wasn't just an artist, he was the fantasy. Women went crazy over it, some fans calling it art, others pure obsession. But behind the screams, a new conversation started. Was D'Angelo in control of the image, or was he being controlled by it? Male critics debated whether he'd objectified himself or been objectified by an industry hungry for a new idol. Either way, the fame that came with Untitled hit hard, and it came with strings attached. Voodoo earned him Grammys, worldwide acclaim, and the crown as one of his generation's greatest musicians. But the same spotlight that celebrated him also crushed him. Crowds would scream through his slowest, most emotional songs, moments that were meant to be sacred, drowned out by the noise of fame. What had once been spiritual expression was now spectacle, and it was breaking him. The success of Untitled brought fame D'Angelo never wanted and pressure he couldn't escape. Record execs tried to lock him into that image, pushing him to recreate the same seductive formula again and again. But D'Angelo wasn't built for that kind of game. He fought back, refusing photo shoots, dodging interviews, and shutting down anything that turned him into a sex symbol instead of an artist. The frustration ran deep. The world was obsessed with his body, not his soul, and it tore him apart inside. The man who'd always been uneasy with fame now felt completely trapped by it. The image that made him famous had nothing to do with who he truly was, and that disconnect started breaking him down. Behind the scenes, D'Angelo was already pulling away from the spotlight, backing out quietly from the same industry that had crowned him king. Then, just like that, he disappeared. After Voodoo's massive success, the artist who delivered one of the most revolutionary albums of his time vanished without warning. Canceled tours, unanswered interviews, and a sudden retreat to his home in Virginia. That silence stretched into a 14-year hiatus that fans and journalists couldn't explain. The calls from the label started turning desperate. Virgin Records had poured millions into his career, waiting on the next masterpiece that never came. Sessions were booked, sometimes costing thousands a day, but D'Angelo would just not show up. Engineers and bandmates sat waiting, confused, while the man they once knew seemed to fade deeper into the shadows. Then came the physical changes. What started as simple preparation for the untitled video spiraled into obsession. Friends said he became fixated on staying impossibly lean, working out nonstop, barely eating a routine that wrecked his body and drained his spirit. The same man who used to move the crowd with effortless energy started looking fragile, almost ghost-like. The charisma that once filled every stage was being replaced by exhaustion and self-doubt. And then came the breaking point. In 2001, during a major European festival, D'Angelo stumbled on stage visibly intoxicated, forgetting his own lyrics in front of thousands. It was painful to watch the genius who once defined neo-soul now seemed lost inside his own chaos. The pain only deepened when tragedy struck in 2006. His close friend and collaborator, J Dilla, passed away, a loss that cut D'Angelo to the core. That death wasn't just personal, it was spiritual. It pushed him further into isolation, depression, and silence, a dark chapter that few understood, but everyone felt. J Dilla wasn't just a collaborator. He was one of the only people who truly understood D'Angelo's creative language. Their connection went beyond music. Dilla could reach him when no one else could. So, when Dilla passed, it hit D'Angelo like a knockout blow. Losing that bond stripped away one of his last reasons to keep creating. The studio, once his sanctuary, became a silent reminder of everything and everyone he'd lost. By 2005, the industry had quietly turned its back on him. Not out of spite, but out of exhaustion. Too many producers, managers, and executives had burned time, money, and trust trying to work with a genius who no longer showed up. D'Angelo had gone from being the future of R&B to being the cautionary tale, the artist who self-destructed right in front of everyone. Every bridge he could have used to climb back had been torched by his own hands. But then, something shifted. In 2012, after more than a decade in the shadows, D'Angelo made his comeback at the Bonnaroo Music Festival, and the world held its breath. The set was short, shaky even, but powerful. The crowd saw a man who looked older, humbler, but still carried that same fire in his voice, a voice that could break your heart and heal it at the same time. That night proved something. He wasn't gone, just rebuilding. Behind the curtain, the process had been brutal. D'Angelo had spent years fighting his demons, the addictions, the depression, the anxiety that fame had only made worse. Rehab, therapy, relapse, recovery. It was a cycle that nearly broke him. But slowly, piece by piece, he found his way back to the music that once gave him life. The man who reemerged after Voodoo wasn't the same as before. He was older, wiser, and deeply grounded in his pain and growth. Out of that came Black Messiah, an album 5 years in the making that fused his rebirth with a higher purpose. This time, it wasn't just about rhythm or soul, it was about healing, redemption, and revolution. With his new band, The Vanguard, D'Angelo poured everything into the project: his faith, his scars, and his renewed love for creation. He recorded Black Messiah the same way he had made Voodoo, live, raw, and unpolished. But this time, the music carried the weight of survival. It sounded like freedom, the kind earned through pain, through loss, through coming back from the edge. The title said it all. Black Messiah wasn't just an album. It was testimony, a spiritual rebirth for D'Angelo, and a reminder that even the broken can rise again. Songs like Really Love showed just how much D'Angelo had evolved, blending the sensuality of his early sound with deep emotional truth about growth, love, and vulnerability. It wasn't just smooth anymore, it was soulful and mature, a kind of music that comes from living through storms and coming out stronger. But this time, D'Angelo wasn't just singing about love, he was speaking for the people. Tracks like The Charade and 1,000 Deaths hit hard, tackling police brutality and systemic racism head-on. His lyrics carried the fire of protest and the wisdom of someone who had seen the world change and changed with it. The same artist who once used music to explore his own emotions was now using it to fight for justice and equality. And while the music grew bolder, so did he. D'Angelo's physical transformation shocked fans. He'd gained weight, grown out his natural hair, and walked away from the impossible beauty standards that had haunted him since Untitled. That change wasn't defeat, it was freedom. He no longer needed to look perfect to be powerful. The confidence he carried in interviews and live shows told the story of a man finally at peace with who he was, flaws, years, and all. Then came the surprise drop that no one saw coming. December 2014, Black Messiah landed out of nowhere, shaking the music world to its core. Fans had waited 14 years, and when they pressed play, it was clear it had been worth every second. The album debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200, and critics called it a masterpiece, a comeback not just in sound, but in soul. D'Angelo had returned, and he'd done it without selling out, without chasing trends, without bending to anyone's rules. The years that followed Black Messiah were unlike anything he'd ever known. Peace. For once, the chaos quieted down. He wasn't running from fame or drowning in perfectionism anymore. The success had rebuilt his career and his confidence, but more than that, it rebuilt him. Now, D'Angelo could finally live as both artist and man, creating without breaking himself in the process. The money from Black Messiah gave him the freedom to move at his own pace, to experiment when he wanted, and to say no when something didn't feel right. He didn't have to chase hits, he could chase truth. And that, more than any award or chart position, was the real victory. That hard-earned freedom changed everything for D'Angelo. The stress that once crushed his creativity started to fade, replaced by peace and purpose. For the first time in his life, his health came first. He built routines that actually nourished him: real exercise, real rest, real food. Gone were the obsessive workouts and self-punishing diets that used to push his body to the edge. Now, it was about balance, staying strong enough to keep creating without breaking himself again. The same music world that once whispered about him being unreliable began to see him differently, as an icon, a teacher, an elder in the culture. Younger artists started reaching out, eager for his wisdom and energy, while his peers from the neo-soul movement reconnected with him not as rivals, but as friends. The tension was gone, replaced by respect, love, and shared legacy. But behind that calm exterior, something darker was quietly building. D'Angelo was facing new health struggles, symptoms that crept in slowly: fatigue, stomach pain, exhaustion. He brushed it off at first, thinking it was just age catching up or the toll of years spent on the road. What no one knew was that these small signs were pointing to something far more serious: the illness that would one day take him from us. Still, he stayed silent. Not out of denial, but protection. D'Angelo had finally built peace in his life, and he wasn't about to let fear or pity take that away. He chose to live quietly, to keep making music, to enjoy family and love without turning his pain into headlines. In the end, the man who once lived for perfection found something far more powerful: balance. He learned how to create without chaos, how to live without breaking, and how to love without losing himself. His story reminds us that peace is the real prize, not fame, not perfection, just peace. So tell me what you think. Was D'Angelo one of the greatest to ever do it? Drop a comment, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. See you on the next one.